7:40. Welcome back. You're watching and listening to Breakfast on GB News.
It's time to go through the papers now, and joining us this morning is the editor of Spiked, Tom Slater, and writer and commentator Candice Holdsworth. Good morning to you both. Tom, let's start with you, shall we? And this is a big story on the front of many of the papers this morning. The police saving the Grand National. That's what the Mail's gone with.
Yes, well, they're also crediting themselves with saving the Grand National because of the fact it was their investigation which originally seemed to tip off Merseyside police to the extent of what was going to take place. They had an undercover reporter go to a meeting in London, in fact, where Animal Rising were meeting to discuss their plans. Of course, the police should also take their role in this. 118 arrests were made. In the end, 9 protesters managed to actually get onto the track itself. 2 tried to glue themselves to some of the jumps as one of their favourite tactics. But in the end, it was only delayed by about 15 minutes, which is a strikingly quick response, considering the fact that, as we've all seen with other kind of offshoots of Extinction Rebellion and Insulate Britain, they can often bring places to a standstill for hours on end. It does sort of go to show when something happens on private property, people are a lot quicker to act, it seems like. But here we have the Mail, as I say, taking their share of the credit for alerting the police to this happening in the first place.
Mind you, I've got to say, I was a bit disappointed. I mean, as well as I'm not convinced that we should keep horse racing like that. It is a difficult one, but nevertheless, I did actually place a bet yesterday.
There you go. Did you feel encouraged by the attempts to...
Yeah, so I'm part of the problem, as my director's telling me. Thanks very much indeed. £5 each way on Mr. Incredible, which is what Aidan McGee suggested.
You shouldn't go with his tips. You should know that by now.
Don't listen to Aidan, is the
Don't listen to Aidan. That's 10 quid down the pan.
Who did win? Because I think that's been overshadowed by all of this, isn't it?
It is.
I
remember now.
Well, this is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Derek Fox, he won on Corach Rambler.
Corach Rambler.
Corach Rambler.
8-1 favourite.
Yeah, that'll be all right, wouldn't it?
The favourite wins. I don't like him when the favourite wins.
A bit boring, isn't it?
Boring. But it has been overshadowed, hasn't it, by these protesters, hasn't it, Candice?
It has a little bit, though. Like we were saying, I think sometimes they just polarise opinion. They don't really tend to bring people with them when they use the tactics like that. Although there are some real questions to be asked about the cruelty towards the animals. You know, I mean, horses do die during the Grand National. They break their necks and they break their legs.
One died
yesterday. Things happen.
Yeah.
But I think when you use tactics like that, you can make people a bit more defiant, actually. People want to oppose you because they don't agree with your methods.
But I suppose they could say is that with a lot of these protesters, well, we've been arguing the point for decades and nothing happens. Therefore, we're forced into more direct action.
But they do seem to be sending people in the other direction as well. You know, even you yourself, Stephen. I think there's one thing about these activists is they kind of give off the impression that they're just against anything that everyone else is into. You know, it's like that old quote about Puritans. They didn't ban bear baiting to save the bear. They did it because people happen to enjoy it. There's a kind of similar thing going on here where they just seem to want to constantly mess with ordinary people's lives and pastimes, and that seems to get people's backs up, even those who might otherwise be open to that.
Well, we're running a poll on Twitter this morning, at GB News on Twitter. Best part of 3,000 people voted so far. It's not really shifted. 77% of people want to keep the horse race Grand National. 23% of you say ban it. So I mean, it's a quarter, but nevertheless, it's overwhelmingly in favour of just leaving things alone.
But a lot of people saying in the comments, actually, if you delve into it, it's not as black and white as that. It's not a yes or no. Perhaps changes need to be made. Perhaps we don't use the whip like we have been doing. Perhaps
flat racing.
Perhaps we move to flat racing, so I think that would still be very fun. And the fences need to be that high. I mean, that's where you see the falls. That's where you get the fatalities of the horses. Perhaps that needs to be changed. Maybe we need to modernise it. Let us know what you think. gbviews@gbnews.uk. OK, Candice, you've got a story in The Telegraph about NHS slack.
Yes, so this is a story in The Telegraph, and it's about how private hospitals are picking up, basically, the slack left over from the backlog and obviously problems caused by the strikes. And what I found interesting in it, that Wes Streeting, the Labour MP, was quoted in it saying he would use even more spare capacity in the private sector. But he's also critical of the fact that the private sector is being used and that the NHS, more and more as he keeps going on, it needs reform. And I find it so fascinating that one of the most powerful voices for reform is actually coming from a Labour MP. You wouldn't expect that. And I just wonder if how much of it has to do with the fact he had cancer of the kidney and he had to go through treatment, and he's sort of had this experience of going through the system, the hospital system, and maybe he feels more empowered and less ideological to talk about it.
Well, yeah, it's a fair point actually. When you've been through the system, it does give you a different insight, doesn't it? But of course, reform. I say it almost every day now. Reform is really something only the Labour Party can do. Because if the Tories do it, they're just accused of privatising everything, and people don't trust them with it. I mean, that's what the polls say. People trust the NHS within Labour hands, even if they're going to change it fundamentally.
It's such a good point, and Tom and I were discussing that during the break, and that was the exact point he made. If it comes from the Labour Party, it becomes more credible in many voters' eyes. And so I think that's where he's performing quite a valuable role, although apparently one of the BMA leaders, Emma Runswick, has clashed with him a bit on this, because I think they have a more ideological perspective on the NHS, and they don't want to introduce any discussion about that whatsoever.
Yeah, it can't continue as it is. It just cannot. It's getting ridiculous.
But it is significant, isn't it? I mean, Shadow Health Sec, Wes Streeting, we had him on a few weeks ago, and he was fully acknowledging the fact that there would need to be reform.
There does. I mean, there was a really good report in the Telegraph this weekend about the doctors who've left to go work in Australia. And they were saying that one of the things that makes it easier for them is that the hospitals are fully staffed, because staffing has become an issue in this country. And one doctor was saying, I think it was his first year of training, one Saturday he was alone caring for 300 patients. And he said he nearly quit because his anxiety levels were so high.
No, it's just not on. My anxiety levels have gone up slightly reading the Observer, Tom, this morning, because Joe Biden has pledged to run again. Nothing against him politically. I'm not pulling it on a political line. I frankly think he's too old, but I think Donald Trump's too old as well.
No, exactly. It's become a very kind of geriatric race for the presidency in recent years over there. So he has indicated he's going to run again. He hasn't formally announced, but he suggested at the tail end of his trip to Ireland that was going to be in the coming days.
Was he telling people he was chatting to, apparently?
Well,
one of his gaffes.
He's quite sort of loose-lipped.
Yeah,
This is one of the things. And so he managed to get through the trip to Ireland with relatively few gaffes. I mean, there were
few.
I mean, for his standards, there was the pretty striking mixing up the All Blacks with the black and tans, which was pretty incredible. But, previously he's gone and almost kind of uttered far more geopolitically questionable things, like we went to Ukraine and seemed to indicate that there were American soldiers there and so on. He's done worse. So it's one of those things where, again, it's just all of those questions about whether or not he is up to the job at this point. I reckon that he probably wouldn't be as bullish about announcing again, or certainly the people around him wouldn't be, if it wasn't for the fact that they're relatively confident that Trump might be the person opposite him rather than a Ron DeSantis or someone who they're a little bit more concerned about. But if nothing else, it locks in really another American presidential race where people are trying to choose between two very unpalatable options.
Yeah.
And that doesn't, I think, produce particularly good outcomes.
Is this really the best that the US has to offer? Two old men, really?
But this is what everyone is saying. And also the Republicans would be foolish to run Trump, because all the polling shows if someone like DeSantis was the nominee, he could actually beat Biden, whereas Trump cannot beat Biden. He's beaten him before and he'll probably beat him again. But with the Democratic Party, are there any other contenders coming up the ranks? I can't think of anyone. I mean, that's why they're running Joe Biden again.
Well, yeah, this is the problem.
That is the problem.
Actually, you never know. It's America, isn't it? It's a weird system.
Yeah.
It's just, you never know who's going to emerge from the system. I mean, which one of us had heard of Barack Obama before he was suddenly a candidate?
And that was fascinating, actually. His campaigning style was brilliant. I mean, it completely overtook someone like Hillary Clinton, this big legacy figure who everyone knew about, and he just emerged.
Yeah, I just think, as I say, it's no disrespect, and if you're an older viewer or listener, it's no disrespect to those who are older, but sometimes things change. I mean, my parents aren't in their 80s, they're younger than that, and they say, why would you want these people to be running the country? You've got a lot of experience, but not necessarily as sharp and as on the ball as you need to be.
What is such a shame, I think, with Joe Biden is if even 20 years ago, 25 years ago, he could have had a shot at this. It could be a very, very different story. But as you say, Stephen, 80 years old, I mean, if he gets this second term, it takes him way into his 80s. Yeah. I mean, it's unbelievable, really.
And it makes people start to think it's a kind of Potemkin presidency, like he's kind of there as the figurehead, but really the decisions are being made around him. And you see that whenever he makes one of these gaffes, he kind of announces something which you hear it from the president, you expect it to be US policy.
It gets rolled back.
No, he didn't mean that. Or as happened in Ireland, they just lightly edit the transcript, which is not great either.
Is that what they did?
They did with the black and tans thing. I think you could see it scored out, but they made it clear of what he was meaning to say.
But it's not a surprise, really, because he has been playing good politics with the Irish-American vote, hasn't he, for the past few days or so in Ireland. We were hearing yesterday, I think it was 10% of the US population claim Irish heritage. So
everyone in America thinks they're Irish.
Yeah, everyone thinks they're Irish. So very much appealing to quite a broad spectrum of voters back in the US.
You know, it's a big part, particularly of kind of Democratic voter base in particular kind of cities and so on. But it was a strange visit insofar as it did, he spent, 15 hours in Northern Ireland, which was the kind of more politically significant
This is what mattered.
Half of which apparently he was asleep, as we all now famously know, although he's probably asleep for large parts of the day these days. And then he goes down south and kind of goes on a kind of who do you think you are style family reunion tour. It was very personal, not particularly political, but as you say, at least it has some valence back home where people like this kind of thing.
Well, he certainly enjoyed himself on the second half of the trip, didn't he? That's for sure.
Can I throw this to both of you? I know, Tom, it's on your list, but Candice, what do you think of this? Because you be a prolific reader. I can see it. I can see it in your eyes. The Jeeves and Wooster, E.G. Woodhouse, of course. I mean, they're just amazing, classic, hilarious bits of writing. It's all that they're being rewritten, according to the Sunday Telegraph.
I know this is a story in the Sunday Telegraph, and we were talking about it. There's just more and more and more stories like this now, of these classic stories being written for a supposedly modern audience, so that we can understand them. And I personally find that a bit infantilizing, that we feel that people nowadays can't read those stories as they were originally written. And that we have to be protected in some way from language that we might find offensive. And I just don't think that's true. I think that we can read these things in the context.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I enjoy it, Tom.
I haven't got much to add to that other than to say it is incredibly patronising. It's also what we're going to do, just kind of constantly having to, novels constantly have to speak to the present. Sometimes you do want to reach the past. We call them the classics for a reason. How far back are you going to go? Are you going to go and get Homer's Odyssey and say there's too much violence in it or something?
Well, plus, of course...
The Old Testament. You got your hands on that, Jesus. The all trigger warnings, wouldn't
The skill of Woodhouse's writing is lost if you actually change his language, isn't it?
Yes, well, it was the same with Roald Dahl. His niche, being a bit obscene, going places that other people won't go, you destroy it. It's gone, and then children don't get the value of that anymore.
Yeah, I think the world's gone mad.
And, I mean, the question is, who asked for it? Who asked for this?
No one, it seems like,
No, the publishers. That's it.
Yeah, no, this is the trouble. Look, thank you both. We shall catch up with you a little bit later on.